Welcome to After Credits here on the Intercut podcast channel, where we review a new movie including everything that comes after the credits. I am your co-host Zachary Shevich, and joining me, he wants Christmas lights for his Hanukkah present. It's Arturo Zurita.
See, I heard that line in the movie, and I just went, don't you get 8 presents technically for like more days? I don't know if the math's up there, but I'm excited to talk about what I consider my personal best picture of the year. There are a lot of movies that come out on a yearly basis, but there was something about sitting there with the craftsman, that is Spielberg, making the most personal film after making so many personal films. And I don't know. I came out of this movie completely floored. You had seen it at TIFF and we're hyping up so many moments. Several people were hyping up several moments by spoiling them, but it still hit, and that's a sign of a great movie. And I'm excited to talk about not just the non-spoilers, but all the spoilery bits that take us back to not just Spielberg's filmography, but technically our childhood since we grew up watching all of his movies.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I think there's this perception of what Spielberg is trying to do here, and that, like, oh, it's this fluffy nostalgia piece and it's about the magic of movies. And I think he's actually making a film that's a way more complex than that, has way more nuances to it. And it's a fascinating piece, especially considering it coming this late in his career and why something that is so deeply personal to him took him 35 movies to get to. We'll get into all of that and some spoilery details a little bit later, but let's start with some non-spoiler discussion about the Fabelmans, because this is the return of Steven Spielberg, perhaps the world's greatest living filmmaker, and giving us his most personal film yet. The Fabelmans tells the story of Sammy Fabelman, a young man who grows up being whisked from suburb to suburb by his family, by his hardworking and brilliant computer scientist father, as well as his fun-loving and eccentric stay-at-home pianist mother. Through them, young Sammy acquires a love of film at an early age, recreating the iconic train crash from Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth using his father's 8mm camera. But as he grows older, Sammy learns that being a great filmmaker and being a great son won't always align. Spielberg here is printing the legend of Spielberg, mining his own memories to tell the story of how a great artist acquires his direction, pun intended. Yet the film is far more interesting than a simple nostalgia play. Spielberg imbues his coming-of-age story with moments of wonder, action set pieces, notes of existential horror, and plenty of filmmaking humor. It's a wonderfully joyful new film and deserves to be recognized as one of 2022's best films. But I've said all of this before on Intercut. Arturo, you've had the chance to see it. You've heaped praise upon praise on this movie. So tell me, does The Fabelmans live up to the legacy of Steven Spielberg?
I think this is a man who's had a legacy that's so big. When you look back at the stuff he's made in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he spent all of the 2000s trying to like recoup that. And I would say like from past 05, all the 2010s, a new movie would come out and we would always be like, is this going to be the one to give us that Spielberg magic? And every single time here on Intercut, at least, we would come back going, I got close. It's still good. It's Spielberg. Yeah. But it didn't feel like that not even nostalgia, I want to say, but like that magic that he used to have. There's stuff he does in this movie.
Yeah.
And there's a way he ends this movie. It's back.
He's so good at what he does that even when it feels like a minor effort from Spielberg, there's a lot that you can latch onto, from the filmmaking to just some of the shots to just the production value. But I think we, as you're saying, have been waiting for that great mix of him handling the right material with the right script and giving it that Spielbergian flourish. And it's all here in The Fabelmans.
On top of that, you mentioned that he hasn't worked on this script, or this was the first script he's worked on since AI, if I'm not mistaken. And that was one where it was, what's his name, Kubrick, knowing that he wasn't going to be around for it, that he's the one who chose Spielberg as the predecessor to be able to continue that story. So that's already 20-something years that it's taken him to come back just for the script writing elements of it. I hear then that the way that they filmed it wasn't necessarily improvising, but there was a lot of moments where they were figuring out on set. And seeing all of the cast and crew just pretty much spill the beans on what he's like on set, I think has been one of the most fascinating things, because his direction for this movie, where he's directing a kid and how he started directing, is like the most visceral and vulnerable places to see him in at work. So I don't know, I was just fascinated by it. I like that he calls it, he says it's not therapeutic, it's cathartic.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Seth Rogen told the story of how Spielberg was frequently crying on the set of The Fabelmans. I can imagine, especially tackling all this material so late on in his life. I think some people have made a note about it's interesting that he waited until after his parents passed away to tackle this material. Because I think, he's kind of, while he is honoring his parents and the film is dedicated to both of them, it does sort of treat them as messy parental figures who maybe aren't always making the best decisions. And I think
that's awesome
for him to feel that freedom to maybe handle this story in that way, he decided to wait until they were not around so he didn't have to face them, or whatever psychological thing you want to pin on it. But I do think it's allowed him to tackle the material in a way that feels very honest.
Yeah, there's a big through line in the movie that's something that he said he's held as a secret and kept it to the grave. Both of his parents have passed, and I think that there's I want to say it's 60 Minutes breakdown where she got to talk to his parents and then plays that clip to Steven, and he sees it and he's laughing at it because he's like, this movie would be the third clip then, because it's me kind of opening up to them what I knew the entire time. We'll get to that when it gets into the spoilers, but just talking about the casting for his parents, I thought they did an impeccable job. We've been discussing on whether who's considered actor, who's considered supporting, what the studio submits, that's neither here or there, but Michelle Williams as the mother, I think knocked that out of the park. I believe they're trying to push her as a lead, and I would say that there's three stories going on here: that of a family and a divorce, that of an artist realizing where he needs to hold his values, and then a nostalgic, almost fourth wall breaking love letter from one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Sticking to that first side of it, a lot of people have been very confused with a story that's about divorce, but the family still loves each other. I'm trying to figure out what this disconnect has been, and I feel that that's one of them, besides the casting, is that you have this family who has elements of different troubles going on, and yet they're always there supporting each other in varying degrees. And I think people expected more of a drama where they're yelling at each other and tearing each other apart. So I don't know if it's a matter of that's not how they've experienced divorce, so it was weird to them. But then I know another factor of it has been the casting in it. A lot of people feel that she is, I don't know, I think it's interesting to critique someone's mother because she feels like a real person, and I think people don't reflect back on their own parents as people. They reflect back on them as these beings who took care of them. But this is a full-grown man whose parents have now passed, and he knows how to direct his mommy, not as a mother, but as a woman who had her own ideals, as a woman who wasn't perfect, as a woman who had her own passions. I thought he directed them beautifully. I know that there's been a problem with Paul Dano. Paul Dano's number one on Netflix this past week for Prisoners. I get it. Yeah. Paul Dano was just one of the biggest villains from a Batman movie this year.
Some people see Paul Dano's
this year.
Some people see Paul Dano's face and expect him to get punched.
So I understand that, because Barbarian this year kind of did a play on the casting of Pennywise and kind of playing on that factor that you knew him as evil.
Skarsgård.
So I can't really say that you coming into this movie as a regular moviegoer, having seen him in only crazy things like that, and then kind of be taken aback. I don't think it's the proper way to look at it. And if you're a movie critic, who I did see a couple of movie critics come in saying that, hey, you don't deserve this job. But for the regular moviegoer, filmmakers do use that. They use the context of where you may know the person as and flip it on them. It kind of sucks here. I see a lot of people trying to belittle, moviegoers for attaching him to another better known role, but that happens. I wish it didn't, because I think that he plays such a nuanced character here. You see him as kind of like the background character, and that it's really a love letter to the mom. Nah, he's got the opening line, and he's got the closing, goodbye, Dad. And I think it's a little bit bigger than that. I can't wait to talk spoilers with these two, but nonetheless, both performers did a fantastic job. Paul Dano, I'm rooting for supporting. I know y'all have a lot of people for lead on actress, but Michelle killed it. Yeah. Michelle killed it.
They're both really excellent here, and I think a lot of the criticism about them is a little bit misguided or unfounded. At least there's been people who criticize how big Michelle Williams' performance is, how periody the voice is, because that's the thing. And if you actually go and look at clips of Spielberg's mom, and there are plenty on YouTube, it's pretty easy to find them. Like she's kind of nailing the performance. Yeah,
she is. And again, it's like that's Spielberg's mom, and you're like, I don't know, she's not acting like my mom. I'm like, what are you reviewing at that point? I'm like, I think he knows what his mom was like the most. But there is plenty of footage to see out there, and there's plenty of footage of the father too, and how somber he was. And I think Paul Dano gets that down beautifully, especially because they both represent the two sides, the dreamer and the tech, that made Spielberg who he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And just funny being with getting back into the Paul Dano thing, that people seem to really want to associate him as the kind of crazy potential hostile guy who
he is, though.
He does it really well, and there's a reason he's so often cast in that. But it also kind of shows your limited experience with him, in that maybe you don't associate him with things like Little Miss Sunshine, or things like Swiss Army Man, or things like Ruby Sparks, or things like what's the other one that was just on my mind? The Love and Mercy one, where he plays Brian Wilson,
Beach Boys.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
we also know him as a director
of Wildlife, right? And he's a guy who does have a lot of range, and while there is something to be said, I think, like the idea of star studies and the baggage that actors carry from role to role that allows people to view them in a certain way, the way that, like, you see The Rock and you instantly think of this, like, big dude who's
but you should because that's all he wants.
You're right. But like, I think I get the reason to, I get feeling like Dano is maybe not the best fit for the role here, but if you're just trying to, like, take in the performance and take the movie for what it is and not bring your own baggage into the film, he's so excellent here and so heartfelt that there's so much pain and kind of like pushed down suffering in the delivery of every one of his lines. It's a very, very good performance. I don't know
think
if
he's that big, but without him, the movie doesn't get 5 stars from me.
Absolutely. And he's the quiet, steady center of the film, while other people are having bigger emotional moments.
And you put it well. The Rock is always going to give you the same performance. There's no Rock movie you're missing to be like, wow, I didn't know he had it in him. I think you're right. A lot of people have not seen his other roles. Yeah. And I would implore you to do so.
Great actors, both of them. Liked them a lot. Would love to see them both nominated. I don't know if I'd go as far as you in seeing them both win. But when just diving a little bit more into the Oscars before we get to some more spoilery details, I love the Judd Hirsch performance. I've seen some people pitch that. I feel like maybe it's a little too small of a performance for supporting actor. But otherwise, like, if there was like an award for best scene in a film all year, I would maybe give that to the Boris scene. It really is so wonderful, and the kind of the heartbeat of this film.
Every year we have one. Last year would have been Harriet Sampson Harris, and she would be passing it on to Judd Hirsch, who really does. He just comes in here and he's just like, I don't know, he's a Fabelman in and of himself. I don't know if you've heard him talk about the role, but he pretty much came in and was told, change this kid's life like my uncle did back when he came into the room after my grandmother had died. Do something that will change his life. And he's like, what? Right. What am I supposed to do here? I'm coming in as this magician who's going to change this kid. And I'm under the belief that whole sequence with him ripping his shirt and all of that,
which Spielberg says actually happened.
But the kid didn't know that was how it was going to play out. So that there were moments where Judd Hirsch was like, I don't know if I'm going to see this kid again. This may be my only moment with this new actor. I hope I can give him some wisdom if he is beginning his career in Hollywood the same way that Steven himself was beginning it. That part of the story. I like the energy he brought.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Judd Hirsch was really, really excellent in the role, and, you know, gets kind of some of the very key lines. Some of my favorite quotes from the film are his teachings about balancing family and art, and that really does really speak to I think the crux of this film being that this pursuit of art that Spielberg is beginning, or that Sammy Fabelman at least is beginning here, is something that is going to drive a wedge between his personal life and his artistic life. And there will be moments that we talk about later where you really see how the artist brain takes over in some very personal moments.
For a lot of characters, yeah.
Yeah. Also, we've been kind of talking around it, but Gabriel LaBelle in the role of Sammy Fabelman, I think is really, really excellent in a way that it does deserve, commending. I think he is carrying a lot in this film, carrying the different tones, and is really selling like the whole experience of growing up through this. I think the film is just... It really needs him to be great in this thing for it to work, and he is pretty great in it.
Yeah. It begins with this little child actor who is terrible. He was trash. I can love a movie and still tell you when the kid's not good, but that little kid had the eyes that Spielberg wanted, and boy, do you get a beautiful shot of his blue eyes. Gabriel is leagues better. Poor kid, I think they had contacts on him, because when you zoom in on him, you can notice it a little bit. And it gives you the look that Spielberg wanted, but I'd say that that's one of the little nitpicks that I would take away from him, that in order to get him to lead it, you have some close-ups that aren't as perfect. But I'm curious to see where he takes it from here, because one, he's a short king, so shout out him. And two, I thought he got it down. And I've been loving all of his interviews talking about how you never picture Spielberg with a cigar. But every time he talks about it, he's kind of like leaked it. He's like, we're on Skype, and it's a cigar. And we're on set, it's a cigar. And he's always got a cigar. And when we talk about a cameo at the end of the movie, he kind of like leaks at how beautiful it is that Spielberg became his idol.
It's so great. I also love, in listening to some of the behind-the-scenes interviews, Spielberg talked about how he was talking with Gabriel over Zoom, and Gabriel insisted on talking to him to try and evoke his presence a little bit more, and he called him out on having kind of like a dead upper lip when he smiles.
What South Park did?
So noticing these things and really evoking them in his performance. I think it's a very, very good
it's
performance
his posture.
from Gabriel
He
LaBelle.
gets his posture down right the way he enters the room. It's good. He did good.
We also have to shout out, if we're talking about the Oscars potential, the boy Janusz Kaminski, because this is a gorgeously shot film. Just the way in which some shots will start on a really gorgeous frame and then very casually move and land on another really gorgeous frame. People have talked about how Spielberg just has this supernatural sense of space and how to use space. And combined with Kaminski, they just make some really, really beautiful moments seem effortless.
And they talked about their storyboarding of it. I remember during the West Side press run last year, everyone was showcasing those little tiny models that he had in order to be able to do the I think it was a school sequence, and hearing them talk about how they'll literally change stuff up on the spot. There's this like crazy thing when you become one of the best, right? Where people will ask you for advice, and how are you supposed to tell them it's in the gut, right? Like, these guys know how to film something just off of pure instinct when you've been doing it for so long. And there are so many sequences in this movie that I thought they absolutely killed it. And were fantastic. And you had even mentioned, we had both listened back on some interviews. There was one thing I caught at the beginning, because a lot of the movie is Spielberg directing young Spielberg direct his early films. Mm-hmm. So in that, it's funny watching him direct those movies, because I felt like, oh, he must be correcting some shots here. There's in particular one sequence where we see Spielberg finally learn how to direct, right? And he's trying to tell this kid, you're in the war, have all of these feelings. But then he doesn't really shoot his face. He shoots him from the back. But the way the Fabelmans is showing it to you, we are seeing him from the front. Mm-hmm. And it just clicked on me. I was like, there's no way that Spielberg older is fixing in the Fabelmans the shot that he didn't get. And you're like, Art, look at this interview. And I find him saying multiple times that he's cheating and finding a way to do that. I remember one interviewer goes, oh, I'm not allowed to do that in my job. I couldn't get away with that. And Spielberg goes, good thing I'm a filmmaker then. It is just impeccable business. And that's part of that fourth wall breaking. This idea where he can revisit history, a moment in the past, and then in true Spielberg fashion try to fix it. All of that with the cinematography, it really, there's a lot of technique, but it's invested in emotion.
Yeah.
And I think you feel it in every movement of the camera.
Absolutely, and he is able to really evoke such strong feelings. Like I one of the things that I love is how easily Spielberg is able to like put on a genre coat in moments. There's like a moment where Michelle Williams gets a phone call, and the way that it's portrayed, it's like straight out of Poltergeist or something. Like it really is surreal and upsetting. Exactly, like he is able to just in a moment bring in all these like genre feelings. There's that sequence also early in the film when they go outside during the tornado that feels like a classic Spielberg action set piece, and that he's able to weave all this stuff in addition to the student film moments to kind of give extra bombast and extra flair to a coming of age story is classic Spielberg. He's really great at doing this stuff.
I'm blanking on it. What's it called when a quarterback who never made it wants their son to do it? They live vicariously. Vicariously through them, right? I have never seen a coming of age vicarious film, because as he's showing us, you see when the kids are turning the corner in their bikes, that would end up being E.T. You're also kind of seeing not just the origins to his movies, but the origins to the shots that you grew up watching.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to know that those would be the early sequences. The short film that he was going to show them for Saving Private Ryan is beautiful. All of the extra little moments where you're seeing what invoked what would be E.T. What's the space one with when the people come over and it's literally his parents. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is about a musician and a technician and how they come together and they're able to communicate with someone on the other side.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like some people, like, they're like, well, Spielberg didn't make this movie, it wouldn't be as good. And I'd be like, I think there's still something there, but it is specifically because Spielberg made it. Because it's about his life. It's such a weird critique because it's like talking about a documentary and being like, well, if none of these events didn't happen, it wouldn't be a doc. Of course it wouldn't. Like, I'm so confused as to how we're critiquing a biopic being about a man. I don't know. I think it elevates a lot of the moments within the film because you see how they carried on throughout his career. And I thought it worked beautifully. Let's talk about Seth, bro.
Yeah, let's actually... Do you want to just talk about Seth or should we get into spoilers?
We can talk Seth with some spoilers because I think this is where you get the big through line that he hid from his parents until they died.
Yeah. So we are going to dive a little bit more into some details about this film because there's so much interesting here. And I think we want to also talk about the ways in which this is not like the sunny reflection on his childhood that some people want to portray this film as. And there is like a messier quality to it, maybe like some upsetting moments that he's depicting. I don't know. It's a fascinating piece. So we're going to start with spoilers and talk a little more about Seth Rogen's character, who is cause of a lot of the drama in the film in a way that I didn't expect when I saw Seth Rogen added to the cast list. But what did you think about Benny?
I completely forgot that he was in Freaks and Geeks, which Spielberg produced. So it's almost like they're finally working together to the fullest extent. I thought he did a fantastic job, and I know that recently, the writer, I don't know why I'm blinking on his name, he had come out in one of the circles. Yeah, and Tony was talking about how he was really worried about him because he goes, this guy improvs a lot. He's going to mess up the script. He said he didn't improv once. In fact, he came in early to study Spielberg. He said he cut his hair, like his hairline, he took it more and more back in order to look like the real Benny who they knew in real life. And he said that people were going to notice it when he went to parties. And he's like, no, I guess my hairline was already receding because of it. He gave it his all. He plays this friend of the family who's damn near a brother, an uncle. I love those little nuances where the mother, I think it's the mom of the dad, doesn't like him.
Yeah.
But that mom also has a sequence that Judd Hirsch also has, that when they're cleaning the table, they always keep the dish. I don't know, little moments like that I also love that I want to make sure I mention.
The plastic tablecloth
with stuff. The plastic tablecloth, there's always someone still eating the meal. They're enjoying it. But what he means to the family is something that I didn't realize how big it was, because he spoke about this guy who you would think almost tore the family apart because he's not just the dad's best friend. He's the dad's best friend who almost kept him from going on to the next big thing at IBM because he was never going to be that big of a technician. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, he couldn't make his wife smile as much as his best friend. And that's where it gets really tricky. And I think it's
Yeah.
such a profound, mature way to make a freaking movie about your parents, and people are missing that.
Yeah, this is a film that is overloaded with empathy in a way that I think is catching some people off guard, because it is a film about a divorce and about the impact that that divorce had on not just the kids, but the parents, or at least Paul Dano in the role of his father. But it's not a film that really wants to lay the blame on anyone, and instead really wants to point out the amount of love that all the people involved have for another. And a lot of that is riding on this Benny character who, by being this sort of light of energy in the film that draws Mitzi, Michelle Williams' character, towards him, and you see the breadcrumbs kind of being laid before they're all shown to you. It's just... It ends up being this really interesting thing. I think one of my favorite lines from the film is he gives to his sister, who says that Mitzi's character, Mitzi, always laughed hardest at Benny's jokes, but their dad was her best audience. And I think it plays to sort of the conflicted nature of these complicated relationships, and that, like, sometimes there are people who really do sustain you in one way but don't fulfill you in another.
Who gave him the camera? He knows good and damn well that at the end he wants to gift him this camera. He slips him the money only to slip it back to him, to not recognize that the person who you feel tore your family apart is also the reason why you continued making movies. You had mentioned that line about the dad being the mom's biggest fan, yet she never understood the dad. It always took Seth Rogen's character to do the let me explain for his jokes just so the mom could get it. You know?
Yeah.
And there was one, what we were talking about earlier about the artists and the family, and that we're always seeing Spielberg as obviously going to be the artist, and his uncle was the artist. Even Michelle Williams was the artist, who they are arguing chose the family instead, and she's trying to get back into playing piano. I feel they dismiss the father as never being creative, and this whole movie is like his love letter to his dad, his father, who never knew that he knew that his mom had an affair with another person. Mm-hmm. He let his father die, and his mom and him kept that a secret for so long. And in that 60 Minutes interview that I showed you, she showcases to Steven his dad on video saying Steven never knew about the divorce. And Steven just made a movie saying, sorry, Dad, I did. He is the opening line of this film, letting little Sammy know this is how movies work. You think the biggest director of all time just got it from the creativity of his mom, or created the revolution that was Jurassic Park, that was Jaws, that was all of these insane movies that have been created? If it wasn't for the technological advancements that his dad taught him, his dad buys him the editing machine. Mm-hmm. Not for him.
Even though he's reluctant at first, he do it.
He told him no.
Yeah.
He bought it because he wanted him to make his mom happy. It had nothing to do with the kid's passion.
Yeah.
And it's that project that he's doing that leads him to figure out that there's an affair going on to begin. It's goosebumps, bro. It's such an insane and mature way to look back at what you would consider a fault, but also recognizing if this didn't happen, as much as I heard in the time, it led me down the path to be the creator, the director that I am today.
Right, and it's very easy to look at Spielberg as this insanely creative person, as this artist, this genuinely great film artist, and be like, he got that from his creative mom, his mom's side of the family, who are also these artists. But constantly, this film is making the argument that he is kind of the balance of both sides. He is the meeting in the middle. There's that wonderful bit in the beginning where they both explain the movie to him, and it's somewhere in the middle where he finds himself. And one of the scenes that I was really struck by in rewatching the film is a moment after he is shown he shows the Western film, and he's talking to his dad in the car, and his dad says, well, what you do is a lot like what I do. You manage people and set expectations and work to achieve a goal. And I think Spielberg is making that argument that, yes, he is a creative, but also he is a guy who has this sense of management and has this ability to control a creative vision because that is his father's influence.
Yeah. And I think he's telling his father, you too were a creative. You too were an artist. You too moved your family for your art, and eventually chose your art as your whole family moved back. And I think he's acknowledging to him that you thought you were in a family, because she says it. Her line in the movie, Michelle Williams, is we're a family full of artists and scientists, and we're always fighting with each other. And I think that was disrespectful to the dad because he was an artist all along. And this is him telling him post his death. He gets the final line in the end of the credits. And again, it's not to his parents. It's to their names. And to Arnold is the final text up on screen. I don't know. I think it's beautiful in so many little ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting dynamic that he's able to portray with them. And I think, again, it speaks to some of the nuance that maybe is being overlooked by reducing this to calling it like some kind of sunny nostalgia pick. I like this movie a lot. And just speaking more about the empathy, it extends beyond his family. I thought it was really interesting the way that he portrays Monica, the Christian girlfriend who gets introduced later in the film. In that,
She'll be an audience favorite.
It's very easy to see her, especially as she's introduced, as this kind of joke. But the more time we spend, the more depth you see to her character, the more that you see she's like a fully rounded person who is very kind of aware of what she's doing in their relationship. And just that he extends people beyond that joke. It's with Monica and it's with the bullies too, that they are first introduced in this kind of one-dimensional way, and through spending some time in the film, you do see greater depth to what's going on there. I thought it was pretty fascinating.
I will only add one. This movie's still dedicated to his parents and the beyond, right? So I think in the back of his mind, he still knows that they're watching, and he still wanted to set the record straight. That at the end, he didn't take the split from the boy either. He did not smoke the joint, so he knows that his parents are still watching from the afterlife in some capacity. I do think he made himself a little more nicer than he probably was. I think Spielberg can also have a temper here or there, but he did make sure that the main character was as soft as he could be. He made him look like he could fly is pretty much what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, that maybe speaks to some of Spielberg's tendencies in making films. He's not a guy who likes to make these overly angry or tortured or conflicting movies. He is a filmmaker who, even when he's mining upsetting material, he's doing it with like a gloss and like a cleanliness sometimes. So maybe the messiness is missing that some people would like, and maybe that's why people are responding.
That's what I meant.
Some people responded not overtly loving this one, but I think it's so tonally consistent and it's a clear vision of what he's trying to communicate. That stuff didn't really bother me. I think it's asking the movie to be something that the movie is not.
I feel you. Because even like his sisters, who we haven't brought up, so we should give a mention here, they were like a really big part of the creative process. And again, I feel like some people hear Divorce and they think of whatever turmoil they've gone through. But what's crazy is that they are all aware of Benny. And Benny, the real life Benny, I think may still be around. I could be mistaken. But every single time that they talked about him in the real world, you know, Seth Rogen was like, oh, you guys are going to feel some animosity. Nothing but great things to say. And that's a perspective that I could even speak on. I don't know about that. I don't know how many people have it's not even a baby daddy drama or anything like that, but to a degree it is. It's the person who split your family and caused them to live in different states, and yet they speak nothing but great things about them. They're like all very much aware of the best that they brought out of each other. So I think that is a different tone that people may not be used to, but I like that. I like the sequences with Julia Butter and Gabriel, where even when the family's fighting, all Gabriel can think of is how would he edit this, which is such a sick way to look at it, right? And you know that Steven looks at it that moment. Way. That moment is so raw because you know that this man, once you see this movie, you're like, oh, that's what he based E.T. on. That's what he based this movie. That's what he based his whole damn filmography on. It's just been trying to make the Fabelmans. But he had to add an alien. He had to add something else. And I love how he's like, this is for the first time. I'm not making it a metaphor. I'm actually zoning in on the memories.
And it's also interesting how bittersweet that moment is because he's not able to really focus on his family. He's focusing on how he would portray that moment, how he wants to shoot that
That's
moment.
such
and it
an artist's creative struggle.
Exactly, and it
It's so
speaks
sick.
directly to the Judd Hirsch scene in that while you love your family, you love
Yes.
this art even more, and how that will always get in the way. And I think to Spielberg, this is sort of like a painful confession that he has let his drive and his pursuit of artistry get in the way of his ability to connect with maybe members of his family.
I agree. I also want to give a shout out to Keeley Karsten. Julia Butters is great. We've seen her in so many movies. She's been in Tarantino. Look at her on Spielberg. She's going to have a huge career. We know this already. She was good. I love that scene when he's editing and she hugs her brother and she looks at him. She's like, wow, this is how you cope. Beautiful work from Julia Butters. But honestly, for a majority of the movie was the sister Natalie. Keeley Karsten killed it. She's the one who has so many lines. She's the glue in the family. That is underappreciated. I think out of all of the Fabelmans, she is the one who is able to like. There's this one sequence where she yells at them and she says, "Stop yelling at each other," and she like calls them both out for this tick that they're both doing and why they can't connect with each other. And I'm like, she really surprised me out of all of them. I personally think she's an even better performer than Gabriel in the movie, but I just want to make sure she got her shout out because as siblings, they have a lot that they're going through together, and knowing that he made this movie. For his sisters, and that they were there a big part of the process, I think adds a specialness to it.
Totally. Talking more about that moment with the family, what I found to be very interesting about the way that Spielberg uses filmmaking in this film is that it feels like Sammy is often doing it as a way to gain control of situations that upset him. It begins with that train crash that he can't get out of his mind, and then when he's able to recreate it and make a film out of it, he is able to move on from it. When he learns about his mom's infidelity, what does he do? He edits a movie together about it to make it make sense to him. And then that even extends to the bit with the bullies in the end, where he makes this summer movie, this summer skip day movie, and portrays the guy who's been hounding him anti-Semitically as this kind of like hero on the big screen. It's one of the more bizarre moments in the film. I wanted to know what you thought about it because I read some interesting interpretations of it.
I think he continued it to his career. I like how you put it. It's him trying to take control of the scenario, that if he can put it on film, he's the one editing it and chopping it. It can only go the way that he wants to. He would then make movies where, like we said, in E.T., it's still those same things that he's trying to control. Can he give it a happy ending? I think his parents are gone, and now he's realized that this is the one time that I can vent it. He was waiting for it. I'm curious. What did you hear?
Well, I wanted to shout out Noah Giddle on Twitter, who put together a pretty fantastic thread talking about the anti-Semitic bullies and how they are sort of their story is sort of an echo for the rise of Hollywood, and how in the beginning Hollywood was this industry that was created by a lot of Jewish producers, and how it became this concern for many in the United States about the like Jewish influence that the movie industry would potentially have.
Interesting.
But that they were then able to align themselves with all of these non-Jewish people, and the way when they were able to align themselves with people like Fairbanks and Pickford and Grant and Hepburn, that was when the industry was more widely embraced. And I don't know, it's just a deep reading of a small, bizarre moment that I wouldn't put past guys like Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner to be commenting on, especially given that like Spielberg himself seems a little bit like conflicted on his memories of the bully. I know you read that one interview where he was talking about getting a call from the bully after he released his first film and finding out he was a cop. I guess Spielberg said ACAB.
I think the one thing that I saw a split with is that most critics found the breaking of the fourth wall, like I might put you in my movie one day, as being a little too cringy. And then I've seen
I love it.
Mainstream audiences eat that up. And I'm on the mainstream audience side. I don't find it cringy because I also love the ending of this movie and what he does there. I think that's beautiful. And I think that's an interesting read. I'll have to check out that thread. That's a fascinating look at it because I feel like a lot of filmmakers who have been doing those love letters are also people who've been working for decades and know the industry and know the ins and outs and would be able to comment on something like that. So
exactly.
I'd be curious to look more into it.
You want to talk about that ending a little bit?
Let's talk about that ending because people been spoiling it.
Oh, yeah. It's a frustrating. Beautiful. I'm really glad I got to see this at TIFF because I was able to enjoy it and having completely forgotten that I heard that Lynch is in the film.
Yep.
So to see him walk in and not only it's him, but he's playing John Ford, what a really cool just cherry on this movie.
It's everything.
There's so much worth reading into about this from Laura Dern being the conduit between Steven Spielberg and David Lynch.
Isn't that awesome?
It's so cool.
I already knew the moment that she was in Jurassic Park. She was like, "Yeah, I use Laura Dern." I was like, "Well, of course, Jurassic Park." And then obviously Laura Dern, after everything she's done for Finch, I'm pretty sure could ask anything. But what a beautiful thing, because you just automatically know both of these men looked up to the same director, didn't they? And then you think about it, they both started at the same time, on complete opposite sides. The most mainstream
They're born
director.
the same year.
I just heard that the other day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's really cool, dude.
Yeah.
I think it is the perfect casting choice.
Yeah, it becomes this really interesting way for not only the both of them to honor a filmmaker that they love, but for Spielberg to kind of pay homage to another great that is his contemporary.
Yes.
And it's funny. I've seen a lot of people making comments like Spielberg needed somebody to have the gravitas of the greatest director of all time, so we brought in David Lynch. But like he's also such a unique performer. He does, he acts sporadically, but when he does, I always love the energy that he brings to the scene. And he's got this kind of like cantankerous aggression in his voice that is so. It's such a contrast to how sunny a lot of the film is otherwise treated. I think it's a really lovely grace note for the film.
I agree with you. The way he says the weather is in the most stoic way possible. But I think it adds another element to what he's saying. This may not be the Sammy that you see. It's not a part of him, but it's something that he needed to be a part of that will stick with him. That very stoic person who's letting you know very simply, this is what you need to be looking out for. And those are words, just like when his uncle yelled at him. It's a moment in time that sticks with him. And I thought that was fantastic. But I've read reviews for the movie that I find funny because of this casting. Have you ever read a review that makes you more excited for the movie, even though the review can be like 2 or 3 stars, and you're like, oh, what you just wrote made me really like it. And it was this idea that Spielberg's always been the guy to be mainstream, and obviously David Lynch, complete opposite side, and claiming that this movie of divorce, he somehow found a way to make it too mainstream and not artsy enough. And I'm like, so Spielberg doubled down on being Spielberg? I'm like, I think it's, I don't know, it sounded like such a great review for what they thought they were going for. I think the casting of David Lynch showcases I'm recognizing who's on the opposite side, and I'm not going to do what your review says and be that director. Go to that director for that. I am this guy. And then what a beautiful sign-off at the end. Have you heard the original before the horizon being switched?
What are you? I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Judd Hirsch came out and said in a panel that originally the switch of the end of the horizon moving and, being a bit for the camera, which I know you're going to mention in a bit, was supposed to be Spielberg in the back yelling, "Cut!" and it goes to credits. What do you feel?
That's great. I think what they settled on is even better.
I agree, because Judd Hirsch was like, I wanted this one. And Spielberg was like, that was draft 1. That did not make it through the edit. Yeah,
no, I mean, that final little note of the camera moving up is so wonderful. In fact, I'll play a little bit from the Directors Guild Director's Cut podcast. There was an interview where Spielberg was talking about the Fabelmans with Paul Thomas Anderson, and PTA wanted to know a little bit more about how they decided to get that final shot.
Come up with the very, very, very end on the day, or did you think of that when? And what I mean by the very end is the adjustment of the camera for the horizon line.
I thought about that on the day I was shooting, and I tried it several times, and the operator, was just sort of panning up,
Yeah.
And I was looking at the monitor, and it looked like we were
did it.
supposed to be looking up there. It didn't make the point about what Ford was saying. And so I got on the camera myself because I did a worse job than my operator, and I went ahead and did it, and it still looked pretty professional. And so what I basically did was, when I got into the editing room, I blew the shot up 30%, and I sent it to the effects house, and I said, make it look like some amateur, just sort of readjusted the camera, put a couple of shakes in there. So it was all an afterthought.
Oh, it's brilliant, though.
How good is that?
Wow. That was one of the questions that I was asking. I was like, do you think he was the one to touch it? Well, I guess that answers why originally it would have been him saying Final Cut. It doesn't move, and why he had to do it in the effects then.
Absolutely.
I have another one for you. They said
let's
he
do it.
said all of the 16 or 18 millimeter that he shot, any of it that you see in the movie, it's his hands.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah,
That's a good one.
He had to get in himself and do it right?
Wow. That's good.
Nice. I do want to talk a little bit more about that horizon thing, because I've seen some people be confused about why he's talking about the horizon there, and whether or not we were supposed to take anything from it. I mean, I think there's a couple different purposes that John Ford telling him to not put the horizon in the middle and instead put it the top or bottom, it's more interesting. It means, first of all, I think there is just the joke of the simplicity of the advice, that there's this mythical filmmaker who's made the greatest films of all time, and his wisdom is something so simple that anybody can apply it to their films. But beyond that, there's also just the idea of doing the unexpected, doing something that's not what you've seen before, right? Don't put the horizon where everybody expects the horizon to be. Put the horizon somewhere where only a filmmaker would put it, a real picture maker would put it. So I think there's that double importance to him telling him that putting the horizon in the middle is not interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then there's also the fact that it happened that way.
yeah. And there's that interview that I put together over on my my YouTube channel and TikTok channel, Multiplex, where I compared Spielberg telling the John Ford story to that final scene in The Fabelmans. I won't play the whole thing here, but I'll put a link in the description to this episode. But it's so cool to see, a decade later from him telling the story, how similar, how exact his recollection of it is, or the recreation of it is, and it just plays great every time.
Yep. It's beautiful. It's one of the best ones. So hopefully people are able to go see it unspoiled, because that is one of the most special moments. Because you even feel it. You don't need to know who David Lynch is or John Ford. It's just a special moment in the movie for the character itself. And then just to know that it has bigger implications to what would end up being our landscape of cinema and what it would influence, I think is even better.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on The Fabelmans? What was your favorite part of the film?
Well, one of my favorite parts was even beforehand. We haven't said it on this podcast. We brought it before. Yeah. Zach has mentioned the play on the name The Fabelmans and how it plays with Spielberg, and I still think that's one of the most interesting parts.
Totally. How if you look at just the construction of the name Spielberg, it's Spiel, which is kind of like a Jewish Yiddish word for it to tell a story or speak, and then Berg is just sort of like a common ending for Jewish last names, and then Fabelmans, fable being a story and men being another ending for it's beautiful, and it's kind of crazy that Spielberg found a way to even turn his name into part of his legend.
And what makes it beautiful is also that by changing it to Fabelmans, you're not just seeing the Spielbergs, you're seeing the Fabelmans. You're seeing a family that you can hopefully connect to, or see how this group tries to become artists and such. I was every time I try to put Fabelmans, it tries to autocorrect because it needs to be Fabelmans. But
yes.
To me, it's just the little moments where he's creating film. I'm a person who, when I'm sitting in the theater, I like getting the projector shots when someone is watching movies. I love collecting those shots. At a certain point, I just had to write the whole movie down. Yeah. The way he was editing, the way he was playing with film, this whole movie, along with Babylon, along with a couple of others from this year, is just filmmaking. I don't want to call it B-roll, but shots to have in your collection to cut to. There is a shot where the kid holds the movie Like his hands become the screen.
Beautiful.
It's just stuff that he's just doing victory laps around, and any of those moments where he's creating film or figuring out different things, like how he could put bullet holes. For
that
his
was my
war
favorite
film,
part. I think
are
when he
things that,
figures out the pinholes to get the bullet effect. It's so cool.
I love those creating moments. What about you?
Yeah, no, yeah, I love that pinhole moment with the bullet holes because it's just for me evoked all that feeling you get when you are trying to put your own project together and you figure out some kind of like workaround or cheat that will work and will look great. It is those filmmaking moments, and like I said, that Judd Hirsch scene also in particular is so wonderful. I think there's just the wrestling of the different sides is something that I think speaks to people who've thrown themselves into creative fields.
So I highly recommend this one. It is available to purchase at home. It's a theater movie for me.
PVOD.
I highly implore. Yeah, leave the theater to go see it. But we've always talked about like leaving the theater, staying at home. Is that price, that premium price at home, worth it? I think it's a little too much personally. But if you were willing to catch one of the best movies of the year, I mean, it's still a combo price for me.
Yeah,
go out to the theater, but I guess it costs the same price if you wanted to see it at home. Either way,
even
it
cheaper,
is a movie.
Maybe.
It is might be even cheaper. You could pause it, you could watch it again, but it is definitely one to catch before your end of the year list, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think we'll be talking a little bit more about the Fabelmans when we get to our best films of the year in a little bit. We're actually recording that very soon on Intercut. But yeah, it's a really special movie. It's a really magical movie, and I think there's a lot to chew on and talk about and look at. And it also rewards us in a way that we really love, in that listening to the interviews about this film, it's great. It's all great. I love that Michelle Williams is now using mitzvah in her regular vocabulary. Like the Jewish influences clearly worked on her.
Let me hit you with that one. How do you feel about that?
That is
casting,
obviously,
if I may, the casting of non-Jewish actors to play Jewish actors, something Armageddon Time was also faced with, and something that other movies, when Latinos try to cast somebody and they may not be it. Curious to hit you with it.
Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting and funny that this conversation is not had nearly as loudly when it comes to Jews as when it comes to other people, especially given that there's a very long history of Jews that are depicted on screen not being played by actual Jews. But, I think it ends up being a conversation that gets muted because Jews do have a pretty decently sized role
run Hollywood, Zach,
in the
that's
industry.
why.
Oh, yeah, exactly. They're the couple Jews in Hollywood run it. But
the casting of one's mother, though, should rely on the person.
Exactly. And the thing is that it's
was.
one of those things that I find this to be my sort of response to a lot of like, I guess like uncomfortable areas in film, in that like it's fine in the micro and bad in the macro. And like I'm totally okay with it here because it works and Michelle Williams is giving a great performance and I feel like it stays true to the spirit of the characters, but excusing it over and over and over and over again does have a greater effect. And I don't know. I'm not the person who's going to solve that. All I know is that it didn't really take me out of the Fabelmans because they're so good and he's so good at depicting it.
Fair enough.
It still feels
true. If he would have told it as the Fabelmans being Navi and they were all blue, do you think?
No, now we got to boycott. Now we got to boycott.
Then he's cleared. But yeah, overall, The Fabelmans, one of the best movies of the year. I am also going through all of the Spielberg movies because we were working on a Spielberg bracket, and damn, is it crazy to just revisit some of those movies and be able to see a lot of the influences and things that would lead, or what led to, technically, those movies being made after the events of what happens in The Fabelmans. So stay tuned for a Spielberg bracket that will be coming soon as well. And like Zach said, more mentions of this movie.
Definitely. But that's about all for this edition of After Credits. You can catch more from me, Zach Shevich, by following me on Twitter, Instagram, or Letterboxd at ZShevich. That's ZSHEVICH. And check out my YouTube or TikTok channels where you can find that Fabelman scene comparison at Multiplex Show. Art, where can people find more from you?
You can find me over at LME Explain on Twitter, on Letterboxd, where I've been logging a lot, and then over here on YouTube, and every week on the Intercut podcast.
Yes, you can listen to every episode of the Intercut podcast on iTunes, Anchor, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcatcher is. I like Overcast, and then make sure you're not listening just to the audio feed, but you're subscribed to the video feed as well on youtube.com/IntercutPod, where you can catch our bright smiling faces as we break down the latest in entertainment. Find new episodes of our Weekend Must Watch streaming on our YouTube channel every Monday. And please leave a comment, like the video, consider heading over to iTunes to give us that much requested 5-star review. Like our Facebook, follow our Instagram, follow our Twitter. You can also support us on Patreon. All of those are at Intercut Pod, and you'll get updates throughout the week from Art, from me, from all the guests that we feature here on Intercut. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, you can't just love something. You also have to take care of it.